do this many, many times and still not be able to find the right button. So welcome. I am so excited by our panelists. Matthijs, we've been chatting about this session since last year. It's probably been almost a year since we first communicated about the possibility of doing this webinar. So I'm extremely excited that we finally have you in the room and on the screen.
Mm-hmm.
For those who might not have caught some of the promotion around this event, Matthijs is the Dutch founder of One Architecture and Urbanism, an award-winning Amsterdam and New York-based firm. One is a global leader in the use of design to conceive and advance climate adaptation and mitigation projects. They're a member of EcoShape. One is working on many large-scale nature-based solution projects around the world. At the Weitzman School of Design, he directs the Urban Resilience Certificate Program. He is a professor of practice, the McHardt Center Fellow for Risk and Resilience, and a fellow of the Institute of Urban Research. He is a co-editor of Building with Nature, Creating, Implementing, and Scaling Nature-Based Solutions. And hopefully we can put the link in, so if you're keen to do a bit of a deep dive there, you'll have all the details. Bar successfully led a co-led design team for Rebuild by Design, the Resilient Bay Area Challenge, Water as Leverage, and Vancouver's Sea to City, demonstrating a unique ability to leverage design as a central tool for navigating complex challenges and for early project identification. Many of these designs are now being implemented, such as the multiple projects for Manhattan's coastal resilience. His pioneering work has led to many follow-up projects and has inspired governments, not-for-profits like us, and IFIs, you might need to tell us what an IFI is, to reimagine how to develop infrastructure such that can be more community-centered, be multifunctional, and make better use of nature-based solutions. Matthijs, I'm so happy to see you and can't wait to hear what you're going to present. I'm going to turn my camera off and hand over to you.
Thank you, Tamsin, and thank you for having me. I'm going to talk today, given the fact that we have a limited amount of time, just dive deeper into one set of projects, which are the projects for Manhattan that we are continuing to work on. And the reason I do this is because sometimes, even with the challenges ahead in places that are very different and that might have different types of solutions, there are a number of things that I think we can all learn from trying to do this work, which is ahead of us, which is fundamentally designing new infrastructures in already full and contested cities. And so I'd just like to lead you through the history of the project that we are working on. I know in that context, I could talk much more about nature-based solutions, and maybe that's something for the Q&A, because I do feel that in a highly urbanized environment of Manhattan, those nature-based solutions are sometimes challenging, but I'll focus on this project first. So thank you for having me. And as you know, in 2012, New York was hit by a superstorm, Sandy, which had devastating impacts for our city. And it made people realize how much of the city was actually in the floodplain. In the darker blues, you have the areas that are in the 100-year floodplain now. In the lighter whites, you see areas that will be in the floodplain in this century. And for that, we developed an idea as part of the Rebuild by Design competition for one part of New York's coastline, the most densely occupied part of New York's coastline. We developed a concept called the Big U in a design team that I co-led with a Danish architect called Bjarke Ingels. And so this is the image from that original vision that we developed in 2013, right in the aftermath of the storm, through a Rebuild by Design competition. And I would like to just lead you through the process of that development, because we won that competition. These five gentlemen then stood up the stage and celebrated the fact that a lot of money was given towards the implementation of that initial project. And since then, we've been stuck trying to get it built. And so what I would like to do is to use this talk to have some reflections about what it means to do resilience projects in complex urban environments. And so maybe it's a sort of lessons learned. And to give you a little bit of context, we developed that initial concept, and this is from an exhibition that we once produced called The Big U here at the center. And since then, we have been working our way around Manhattan's coastline in a number of different projects that are each in different stages of development, either as design or some of construction, under construction as well. And so one of the things that was really critical to the Rebuild by Design, this competition's concept, this way of approaching how to do coastal resilience is to say, let's take time to explore and define the problem. In the United States, there was a sort of habit of not being very much looking forward in how to deal with climate risk or with risk in general. Basically, after a disaster happened, the insurance would come and pay for places to be rebuilt. And the idea of the Rebuild by Design competition was to say, well, that's obviously not a good idea. What we should really do is to sort of start to research what is really the problem that we're facing in this city and what is really the problem with an increasing climate. So rather than immediately put out an RFP to an engineering team, they set up this process, which in itself had a sort of sabbatical detour, which allowed us to engage with communities, learn from people, understand climate risk in a more complex way, but also understand how potential climate infrastructure could intersect with the fabric and the challenges of the city, which were significant. The storm had huge impacts, flooded our infrastructure. It had huge personal impacts, economic impacts, and some of those were really very local, right? The elderly woman who, because the power was out, had to stay on the 20th floor of her subsidized housing, unable to get food because she didn't know anyone in the building and the elevator didn't work. It's really from big to very small issues. And I'm just looking at the chat. But so once we started to understand it, we understood, of course, that much of Manhattan was in the FEMA flood zone. That part of the reason much of Manhattan was in the FEMA flood zone is that we had been growing our island over time through land reclamations, swamps that have been filled to make place for our industries and ports, mostly something that is being done by the Dutch. And that meant that after Sandy, a lot of things needed to change. And so the New York City made a plan called the SIRR plan, which articulated a host of different measures that could be taking place, many of them very local, but it also identified one sort of big idea, which was to develop an integrated coastal protection system around this area in Lower Manhattan. And as we thought about it, that really is a huge challenge, right? Cities have reconnected to waterfronts in the last decades, and to sort of sever that connection now because of rising tides and increased storms is a real challenge, but also would really be at the detriment of the city. And at the same time, temporary measures also do not work at the scale of New York and most of the coastal cities. It's not for nothing that Angela Merkel looks so bummed here in this picture. So what we started to think about is, can we not take our cue from projects such as the High Line, where basically infrastructure that was made obsolete was sort of repurposed and programmed in different ways, really revitalizing neighborhoods. So our idea was to say, if we have to design this infrastructure, can we not combine it with program? Can we not make it about people? and program, and through that really create an infrastructure that is very much driven by all the different needs of the city, so that not only during flood events this infrastructure would be functional, but also in all other moments. So we went on, as part of the competition, on a lot of interaction with all kinds of different communities, stakeholders, public agencies, private sector agencies, to sort of, in a way, co-design the idea, because we feel that investing in engagement and stewardship for these type of projects, but also for all the climate adaptation that we're going to be doing in the next decades, if not centuries, is really critical. So as part of the competition, we held workshops where we literally brought sort of typical solutions to these neighborhoods, and then discussed how typical solutions could fit, which ones could actually fit, and really co-produce the design together. That is really important, because later on, as we started to bring these projects into implementation, that investment in that stewardship turned out to be absolutely critical for the public acceptance and the buy-ins for in these already contested spaces. And the second element in that context was, of course, really important, is to work towards multiple benefits. So our idea during that competition was to initially say, well, wouldn't it be great if we elevate parts of the coastline, and in this case use the service roads for some kind of levee, to then use that levee also as a bridgehead for better connections across the highway between this park, which is very much a Robert Moses Park, and the public housing campus across the highway in this typical Robert Moses landscape. So really start to think, how can we use this infrastructure in a way to sort of improve the parks and the usability of the parks across and connect those neighborhoods and reconnect those neighborhoods to the waterfronts, but also at other places where, for instance, the highway would be elevated, you could start to think about arts and other types of forms that could really start to integrate as much as possible with the urban fabric, and make spaces that have meaning for people and that could be used by the community. So the second component that was really important for this project is that 8 to 10 miles is really complicated. So the idea of the big U was to say, well, maybe it is an overall vision, but what it really is a sort of necklace of smaller projects that need to connect together, and that can each be developed independently to each other. In a way, the big U is made out of small U's, compartments that each tie into higher grounds, and that could each be developed independently, because that would make it possible to create much stronger local connections, to make the whole project much more manageable, and to go one step at a time in this process. And that idea to really structure this project out of smaller projects has proven to be incredibly important as this project has developed over time. And slowly we've seen, based on that, this big U, and you saw that in the earlier image, grow over time into a larger U. We are now sort of bypassing the J. Another thing is that you don't want for these type of projects to only not really focus on collaboration with communities, but also what we really learn to understand is this is a new infrastructure, a new type of infrastructure in a city that is already contested, where the entire practice of designing infrastructure needs to be very different. And that means another level of collaboration with all the different stakeholders, but also within the team, with the engineers, etc. And for that, we needed to spend a lot of time in really thinking how the O&M could be developed much better. Part of this project is with the Department of Transportation. Part of this project is with the Department of Parks. Part of this project is with the Economic Development Corporation. each have their own manuals and standard details and guidelines. And really, we discovered that as designers, sort of navigating between these agencies, between these different guidelines and reconciling them was critical to getting all these different agencies on board and bought into this process. In that, we really needed to figure out how to do the operations and maintenance of the flood protection system that was in there. We needed to set up new agencies to be able to do that. But we also understood that in order to do that, it was critical to bring these different agencies on board. And not all the agencies care about flood protection. We discovered that the Department of Transportation really thought of this project as a nuisance because it was not part of their mission. But we did at the same time discover that the things that they were about could actually be addressed by this problem. So, or by this project. They were very worried about the traffic safety on some of the intersections along the coast. So we spent a lot of time to redesign the flood protection such that it would also necessitate a redesign of the traffic infrastructure that could be paid for by the project, and that would create enhanced safety, a better traffic flow, and all the things that the Department of Transportation did care for. So we really needed to sort of in a way empathize with all these other interests and and introduce them into design as a way to get all those other interests on boards. And with that, the challenge, of course, is to integrate designing and engineering. This is how engineering normally looks like, but in such a complex process with all these agencies and all these communities, it was really critical to develop different ways of starting to draw the trade-offs, the analysis, and the solutions such that they could be understood by a wide variety of actors in these complex spaces, as you see us here doing in another project a bit more to the south. What is important is in that we feel that our landscape informed approach really helped us up the game for infrastructure design. In, for instance, this first project, the Eastside Coastal Resiliency, that came out of the Big U, where we rethought how you could design flood walls in a way that could be much more attractive, in which we really designed all the infrastructure as public infrastructure, making clear into the city what it is that this infrastructure does, why it is important to have it there as a way to make this really a public project, and really figure out ways to, through that, integrate it better into this contested landscape of the city as we were getting this constructed over time. And here you see a picture of about half a year ago or before the autumn or the fall, when you see the first areas starting to be almost ready. And all that we understood is really critical once you start to go on these huge tests to develop a culture of learning with communities, about trade-offs, about the technical complexities, but also within the city. And luckily, as we are progressing with this project, we are now, let's say, in design about 6 miles in. We are continuing that culture of learning as we move to the south in the Vidalia Seaports Climate Resilience Plan, which we are working on now, which is a bit more to the south, and I'm almost done, where the complexities are even much bigger, because this is really the hub for all the transportation in the city, and of an incredibly high density, where we're starting to look at even the longer term changes of climate and creating design elevations that given the complexity of the project will make the infrastructure that we design last for at least a century, and through that creating in this context a sort of double level landscape on this southern area of Manhattan. And there, as with all these things, we continue to do the engagement and build the stewardships around these projects, because this is really a long-term effort that is now taking place in New York, because New York is a place that has been hit by a storm, that has the resources to start working on this, but that will start to be replicated in cities all over the globe. And in that, we think that design and landscape architecture is really an incredible tool for risk reduction, not only in terms of climate risk, but also in making sure that these projects actually get built and find their ways into cities, because that's an even bigger risk. We might not, in these contested cities, it's just very difficult to get our projects built, and I think it's because of that design and landscape architecture really play an incredible role and should be always driving this rather than that engineers drive this. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I think we'll do questions together after Charles has presented. But guys, we have the chat. If there's something burning that you absolutely have to get off your chest, go for it.
Please, I'll work the chat if people ask questions. Yeah.
Awesome.
Take
Awesome.
time.
Cool. Okay. I'm going to introduce Charles. So whilst I think most of the people on the call have a sense of landscape architecture and design and whatnot, there are probably a few of us who are going to be scratching our heads when we come to the finance part. The good news is that Charles is very good at explaining stuff, and he's going to take us through very gently. I did ask him to be gentle because this is not our space. So Charles works at EY in Cape Town and is passionate about building sustainable investment sector solutions that include blue-green bonds, carbon offset instruments, and other ESG-related financial instruments. His particular expertise is combining these funding sources with on-the-ground initiatives run by NGOs and other custodians of natural assets in suitable funding structures to enable the conservation of natural assets whilst building a sustainable economy for local communities and the region where the natural asset is located. Other experience is in developing and implementing growth and risk mitigation strategies across SMEs and global institutions, including risk management that covers all aspects of risk, including investments, ESG regulatory, and enterprise risk. So whilst Matthijs was saying that, we need to work in an integrated way with design professionals, we also need to be becoming much more familiar with this funding, with this finance talk, and learning how to leverage it. Because it's not just about the design, it's about bringing the two together. And I think that is where some of the magic lies, and that is certainly where a lot of our muscle as landscape architects is a bit weak. Charles, I hope I did you justice. You're welcome to fill in any important gaps I might have missed, but I'm going to hand over to you now.
Thanks, Tamsin. Okay. And this goes with the caveat that a lot of what I'm going to tell you is, I guess, still being tested because it's quite a new sector. And but I think it speaks quite nicely to what Matthijs was talking about, in that there's a lot of work that needs to be done both from a climate change adaptation and mitigation perspective. And the financiers of the world and all of us working to develop these solutions need to find ways to fund the adaptation and mitigation that needs to happen. And so at EY, we have developed a sustainability field of play. And a field of play is basically a integrated multidisciplinary solution that addresses a big topic. So sustainability is considered one of those big overarching topics, and you're never ever going to solve a sustainability problem and develop a solution without having a multidisciplinary team. So sustainability is almost woven like a thread through the entire tapestry of the organization. So when we do a piece of work, we'll have the accounting team, the risk team, strategy advisors. Often we'll pull people from my team, lead advisory, which does M&A work. We'll have quants and mathematicians, and all those skills are required to help to develop the financial solutions that we design. Okay, let me put up a few slides so I'm not just droning on. Now I've got to figure out how to get this going. Slideshow. Sorry, I'm not used to using Zoom, so you have to forgive me. I'm a bit. I'm gonna be a bit slow and technologically fumbling the ball. So.
You can blame it on the long weekend, Charles.
Yeah. It was actually supposed to be a holiday for me, but of course that never happens in the world of consultants. So. Okay. There we go. No, I actually need that on the other screen. Yeah, excuse me, sorry. Let me try that again. Apologies. The presentation has disappeared now. If it's possible. Oh my word. Where is it
Charles, while
gone?
you look for it, Matthias, can you maybe tell us what role EY played in the Manhattan example? You're still on mute.
I'm muted. No, so they're part of the team there because for the financial district, we're still figuring out the funding and the financing. The earlier project that I showed, which is partly built now, has been funded by the federal government and by the city government. But we realized that for the financial district project, which is going to be significantly more expensive because of all the constraints there, we're going to have to think out of the box in funding solutions. And so as part of the integrated team that the city has hired to figure this project out, EY is on board and helping us consult on how to do this. So I'm excited to hear about the Charles' overall narrative, because my experiences with EY are absolutely top.
Awesome, thank you. Charles, have you found yourself?
I'm almost there, but now you've disappeared. So you've become like a tiny.
We can hear
there
you.
we go. Okay, I got it back. Okay, look, I'm going to do this the old-fashioned way. I'm not going to use the slideshow because for some reason I can't get that to work on Zoom. It makes my slides disappear. So I'm going to bring up the presentation now, and then just let me know if you can see it. I'm staying off video because I think I'm having some connectivity issues as well.
No worries.
Probably find that my teenagers are on their screens. So, okay. Can you see my presentation now?
Yes, we can.
Brilliant. Okay. So glad to hear that Matthias is having some good interactions with our team over in I presume that's the US. I've done a little bit of work with some of my colleagues there in the corporate finance team. So, so the next few slides that I'm going to share have been recently developed by Sustainable Finance, and there it is. I don't need to say it. You know, the financial world is changing, and there's no bank on the planet or financial organization that doesn't have a sustainability team, a sustainable investment team, a sustainable finance team. And our mantra is that within the next 20, 25 years, we're going to see convergence of the sustainability theme and finance. There will be no deal, there will be no project, there will be no investment made without the appropriate sustainability criteria met. It's already a foregone conclusion for most private equity firms operating in Africa that they must have a strong sustainability framework in order to obtain funding and deploy that funding. One of the most recent stats that I got from some of my colleagues that are in the fundraising, the capital raising teams in Europe that work with fund managers that deploy capital into Africa is that 80% of the funding that is going into private equity funds that are being deployed in Africa is coming from impact or sustainable finance sources like development finance institutions. And they have been leading the way for a number of years, but their method of investing is now almost becoming the gold standard. So I'm going to skip ahead a few slides here because a lot of this presentation was actually designed for corporate, which I don't really want to get into. But what I do want to talk about is the base of sustainable finance theory. And in order to attract sustainable finance, you need to have a project or a business or a venture that you can raise funding for. And in the past, when you wanted to raise funding for a venture, you would have looked at the net present value or the IR, the internal rate of return. And one of the easiest methods for figuring out whether something has future value or not and is worth investing in is using a discounted cash flow analysis. And so all you're doing there is you're taking a stream of cash flows and you're discounting them at the required rate of return, and it gives you the present value. And if you have to invest $1 million today, and the net present value according to your discounted cash flow analysis is saying it's going to be worth $1.5 million in a few years' time, brilliant, you're going to make a nice return. But that's purely financial analysis. What total value management starts to do is it starts to look at the entire equation of an opportunity. So it doesn't just look at all the financial metrics, it starts to look at a broader analysis. And this slide here actually sums it up quite nicely. And for years, some of my predecessors who are a few years ahead of me in this sector and in my team at EY have been singing from this hymn sheet. And this, what this very confusing diagram does is instead of just adding up the future cash flows of your project or your business, it's looking to add all of the economic benefits plus all of the social benefits and all of the environmental benefits, and also considering the potential environmental, the negative consequences from a socio-economic and environmental perspective. When you look at that holistic picture, then you start to be able to value an opportunity on its true full merit rather than purely financial. And I guess the easiest way is probably looking at it in terms of renewable energy versus a coal-fired power station. So in a coal-fired power station, you're obviously going to have a fantastic financial benefit. You're probably going to have some socio-economic benefits in that there'll be upliftment in the region and there's going to be jobs, but it's also going to have negative social implications in that there could be negative health consequences for people living nearby to, coal plants or coal-fired power stations rather. And then, of course, plenty to talk about from a negative perspective on the environmental costs. Compare that, for example, with a hydroelectric scheme, and there some of the classic hydroelectric schemes in Europe are where they have reservoirs at the top and the bottom of a mountain, and when they've got excess electricity, they pump water up to the top of the mountain to a reservoir, and when the solar panels aren't producing or the wind is stopped, then they release it down, or during peak hours. And it was quite fascinating the first time I saw this. I was actually on a ski trip to Alpe d'Huez, and I saw it happen, and I was with a hydrologist to explain the whole situation to me. And of course, there you're going to have lots of, financially it stacks up. It's got a strong financial benefit. It could have had a good social benefit too, in that it's better for people's health than pumping out fumes from a coal-fired power station. But of course, there are environmental considerations, because you're messing with Mother Nature. Although there are positives in that, it's low carbon, there are some negatives to consider from a blue footprint perspective. So the way that we start to try and create a valuation around all of this is that you first of all try and figure out what kind of impact these various buckets have on the cash flows of the business or the project. And then you also need to consider how you would change the required rate of return. So for example, if I've done a lot of vetting of management teams over the years as a financial analyst, and if I felt that the management team was strong, then I would reduce my required rate of return, because I would know that the management team would work hard to develop the value of the business, and there would be less risk for me. However, if I felt that perhaps the management team were inexperienced, or they're cowboys, or they weren't doing things right, perhaps they were potentially flouting regulations that could come back to become could have negative consequences, then I would ask for more. And effectively, what that higher required rate of return does is it decreases the value of that opportunity. So that's the financial theory combined with sustainability. Now I'm going to skip ahead a little bit to we don't want to get onto modeling, because that is a very long topic to discuss. But I just wanted to give you some insights into sustainable financing frameworks. And Tamsin mentioned that I'd worked on some green and blue bonds, and green and blue bonds and sustainability linked instruments, and both from an equity perspective and a debt perspective, are all built on the number one, the need for that type of financing and the opportunities that are out there to take advantage of. And it's also a path, it's a journey that the financial services sector is on. And so this is just some of the big numbers as to the size of the tasks, the amount of funding we need. And I think through Matthias's presentation, what struck me is that, in order to execute those projects, you require a huge amount of funding. So, and we all know, us South Africans and across Africa, developing infrastructure and now adapting that infrastructure to withstand the potential negative effects of climate change, and having to consider mitigation efforts at the same time. It requires, and I'll bring an African focus slide up just now. It's going to require a huge amount of money. I can't even conceive how much $125 trillion is. But it's a staggering amount of money. And so us financiers need to figure out how that funding can be obtained and how it can be structured. And very importantly as well, how we make sure that it's put to good use and it's tracked and recorded, and that we know that our efforts haven't been abused. And I think that this is, we talk about climate change a lot, but there's a lot of social factors that need to be considered. And together with those social factors is the political will that's required in order to implement these solutions. We also need to understand that this is a journey, and we have to develop pathways that are logical and practical in order to achieve what we want to achieve. And I think that we're already seeing this in that those that are leading the charge from a sustainability perspective are already starting to enjoy the benefits of financial solutions to fund and to obtain that finance in the first place, but also to obtain it hopefully, and often is the case, at a slight discount to what would be required. And so we've developed a nice, easy framework. I only joined EY a year ago from another firm, and it was quite interesting to see that the framework that we had designed was very similar. Our manner of thinking and our approach was actually very similar to the way that other sustainability professionals were approaching this. And so just a few ideas on how we think this will transpire from where we are now. Obviously, what I think, where we are now, this task funding what we have to fund, the transition from what is really an unsustainable pathway to sustainable, is almost unimaginable. Those numbers on the previous slide were very scary, and trying to find that money and trying to convince it that we have solutions is going to be pretty difficult. And I think, the sustainability sector and the sustainable finance sector has a few challenges to overcome in the form of greenwashing. I'm sure that all of you would have been familiar with some of the, some of the occurrences. One that's known by many people is the VW saga, where they were tweaking the performance of, I think it was their diesel engines and the fuel consumption, trying to paint a greener picture than they were actually achieving. And it had huge detrimental consequences in Europe. I don't think that, being South African and living here for most of my life, and not being a VW driver since I was at university, I wasn't really paying attention to it. But my European colleagues, and I do a lot of work with my German colleagues, said it had a huge negative effect on VW as a firm. And so this is one of the first mountains to climb, which is the ESG risk mitigation mountain. And that is to make sure that companies aren't trying to use sustainability credentials in the wrong way. But what we're finding is that there's a lot of new technology, and of course AI is helping with this. And we've developed, I think we're on our 4th version now of our internal AI tool, although the 2nd version is in implementation at EY. So we have our own version of ChatGPT that we can use to help with research. Of course, we still have to write our own reports, but I'm sure the day is probably coming in the not too distant future where those tools will be writing reports and checking information for you, and making sure that what's being reported is accurate. And that's where we think that AI will come in as a great tool. Probably won't go through the whole timeline because I don't want to take up too much time, but I guess the line speaks for itself. And hopefully by 2050 we hit that the pinnacle of decarbonization complete. I like the way that we've put there in theory, of course. Okay, so the next slide is really where it gets interesting. So to build a sustainability framework, you have to start from grassroots. Now, that involves actually first developing a strong risk mitigation program. And I actually want to bring up another slide, which comes from my old firm, but we've applied this theory against and compared this against EY's theory. And it's this 4-quadrant model basically talks to the journey that sustainability and sustainable finance has been on. And so this bottom left quadrant is where it all started, and that's where ESG was actually really more like health and safety, and it was risk mitigation. So it's writing policies, implementing policies, and then gathering data and reporting. So it's almost a strong sort of internal audit function, making sure that no harm is done, that you're looking after your workforce, and the environmental requirements for your organization have been met. The second part of the quadrant is where you start now moving into a value add position, but it becomes a cost to the business. This is where you wanted to start to put ESG to work effectively and develop a program that you could leverage off to take yourself into quadrant 4. Now, quadrant 4 is where you start using ESG and sustainability to launch your business into new products, new service areas, using ESG as a guideline. What we've seen over the years is that ESG is a great benchmark in organizations for risk mitigation, but also for their ability to innovate. And the leaders around the world in ESG are often the innovators and are those that are leading the way in their various sectors. And of course, where you don't want to go to quadrant 3, which is where VW went, where they used what they had started to try and develop in their ESG program, and we're moving into quadrant 2, but slipped up into quadrant 3, getting ahead of themselves, promising things that they couldn't yet deliver. So you want to, best avoid it. Okay. Let me just go back to these slides now. And so the way that we implement that value proposition from the previous slide is that we start to look for ways to transition. And so, for example, for a mining company, a natural transition is to try and move away from using fossil fuel sources and to look to using clean energy. They can do that a number of different ways. They can develop their own energy solutions, or they can approach renewable energy service providers, and they can set up power purchase agreements with those, and with those providers. They can also go into bidding for green attributes, which energy companies now allocate via almost like by trading platforms. So, for example, a nuclear power station would be able to issue certificates, which are green attribute certificates, and prove that the energy that that the power plant is producing is at least not emitting carbon, and the mining company can buy those attributes and thereby transition to clean energy. And then, of course, there's many other things that have to be considered, such as supply chains and operational efficiencies and logistical efficiencies, which all contribute to reducing carbon footprints. Okay, that's some of my great consulting colleague jargon, and I think I'll skip that slide. But in terms of where we are in the way that we approach these problems, and I applied this in a recent blue bond, is that, you know, the first thing we have to do is make sure that we overanalyze everything. And I am a CFA charter holder, so, and I was, I guess, a born financial analyst. So everything we do is about finding the data, looking for ways to be innovative in the way we analyze things. And one of the most important things through that is identifying ways for us to box smart. And so, of course, we want to take our analysis and try and develop a new solution, but sometimes we also need to look at ways to retrofit. And it was quite interesting in this blue bond that we did. We were all looking at it. It was an issue with a developing coastal infrastructure, protection to protect against high, weather events like that storm that hit New York. And so everyone was looking at, of course, infrastructural development and artificial solutions, such as walls and bollards. And eventually the best solution that was decided upon was kind of like a retrofit, which was reinstalling, or not reinstalling, but regrowing the mangrove swamps, which had protected that section of coastline for centuries before, but because of pollution and partly because of climate change, had been reduced to, I think, 5%, if I remember correctly, of the size. And so that was quite an innovative retrofit there. And then I think that, the great thing that's come out of these processes that we follow is that once we've assessed all of the risks and all of the potential, of the potential solutions we're looking at, we don't stop there, but we continue to try and, imagine what other potential, what the future holds for the various sectors that we're focusing on. And I wish I could go into more detail on this thought process, but I need to skip over it because I promised you a slide on our African numbers, and I wanted to get to that, and then I just want to talk to you about a blue bond that I did recently. Oops, I've lost some of that content. Sorry, because I've been switching between slides, which is dangerous. Okay, so for Africa, the task at hand, and this slide is courtesy of some of my industry colleagues at a company called FSD Africa. The FSD is a British aid-sponsored now investment manager and think tank organization that is pretty much leading the charge in impact investing and green finance. They've got a unit that focuses on green finance across Africa. I think they're based out of the UK, but also Nairobi. And so this is research that they put out recently. And again, they're another staggering number, $2.8 trillion required just to meet the nationally determined contributions that African governments have agreed to between 2020 and 2030. And so far, 264 billion committed, which leaves us about 90% to fund through private capital markets. The good news is that the money is out there, so finding that money is possible. But it's up to us financiers to find ways of attracting that capital and then deploying it. And so the right-hand column talks to a few of those opportunities. And of course, things like renewable energy, natural capital, setting up digital platforms, and then finding ways to deploy capital through the domestic financial institutions. and getting match funding from local governments and local financial institutions. Now, just to touch on a couple of those buckets. So from a renewable energy perspective, obviously it's a sector that has garnered much attention in Africa. There's a huge amount of funding that's been deployed, but the need so far, I think, in terms of the amount of energy we're producing and the amount that's required, we've only scratched the surface. So there's still a huge opportunity. Financially, it can be a very difficult proposition, because often the cost that energy is sold at and the affordability of energy by the average person in Africa is not at a price point that it can be produced at. However, any of you that follow the renewable energy sector, I think that the price per kilowatt of solar to buy solar panels has gone down to something like 12 US cents. Now, that's obviously a staggering reduction compared to where we were, and it makes setting up renewable energy solutions far more affordable. But finding ways to crowd in those, the various types of funding and creating blended finance solutions between development finance institutions and commercial capital is very tricky. And the other thing that we have to do is we also have to develop what's known as a hybrid solution, which combines debt and equity, because a renewable energy project doesn't happen in one go. It goes through various stages of funding. So lots of funding available for that, but it's a sector that obviously requires a lot of development. Another sector that's gaining a lot of interest is the natural capital sector, and one of the buckets within there being conservation finance. I'm sure everyone's aware that hot on the heels of TCFD, which was all about focused on carbon, is now TNFD, which is focused on nature. And so I've been working with a team based out of our Europe West division, which is at the forefront of helping to develop biodiversity linked instruments. So they will map out the biodiversity impact of a global organization and set targets to either reduce biodiversity impact or help to improve biodiversity, and of course the environmental, the other natural capital considerations around biodiversity in the region that they're operating in. And off the back of that, they will issue a bond, and the targets that they set for biodiversity will be key performance indicators. They'll be built into the term sheet of that bond that's issued. And off the back of that, the firm will hope that it can, number one, be at the top of the pecking order when wanting to issue bonds to the market. And it would obviously hope that it could raise those bonds at a lower interest rate. And potentially what a lot of funders are actually asking for as well is they are saying that they want businesses to not only, it needs to be yin and yang. If you want to have a discount for meeting your KPIs, if you don't meet them, then we actually have a penalty clause as well. Okay, so those are some of the opportunities. The natural capital sector is somewhere that, coming from the bush in Zululand, I've been obsessed with it. And I was very fortunate that I was included on a team that got to work on a few natural capital solutions. I'm a huge fan of the ocean, and as that is part of the theme for today, I thought I would speak about a blue bond that I worked on. And so a blue bond is effectively, it can be used in both a private and a government situation, but typically to date, it's mostly been government bonds. And so there'll be a host country, and for this bond, our host country was Ecuador, and Ecuador wanted to see if it could raise funding. They were effectively in a fiscal pinch, and the cost of debt had risen from around, I think it was around 5% on average for their government bonds to over 9%, and some of the bonds they were issuing were 12%. And their currency had devalued by about 50%. Inflation was skyrocketing, and they needed to raise quite a big chunk of debt, and they also needed to restructure some of their existing debt. The Paris Club, which is a group of nations that issue funding to developing countries on concessionary terms, had come together and had offered them an interim solution, but that interim solution was still at a cost that they couldn't, afford long term. And so one of my colleagues came up with the idea that they could issue a blue bond. And this, by the way, this is a caveat, this wasn't a deal that I did during my time at Ernst & Young. It was before that, so it was a previous colleague of mine. And effectively what the deal does is, if you have to find a natural asset in the borders of the country that can be protected or can be restored, and then you have to find investors that are willing to loan money on concessionary terms in order for the country to use for whatever purpose, as long as that asset is protected. So in this case, the asset was the Galapagos Islands. There was a marine protected area of around about 90,000 square kilometers, I think it was, around the islands. And that was to be increased to initially 450,000 square kilometers, but they're doing it in 2 stages. So this first phase is seeing that marine protected area expanded to 220,000 square kilometers. And of course, everyone's first quip is that marine protected areas are fantastic, but unless you can police them effectively, then they're not worth the paper that they are decreed on. And so built into the structure is a funding mechanism. Now, this very confusing diagram has got 2 sides to it. So this first part on the left is how you set up the funding arrangement between the bank and the government. This side is how you extract funding for the conservation efforts. And so in this case, we were quite fortunate that because of the interest rate increase, government bonds were trading on average at around a 40% discount in Ecuador. So that meant if we bought $1 billion of bonds, we actually only needed $600 million to buy those bonds. But we would still be paid back the full amount of the $1 billion if we restructured. Through the restructuring process, though, we negotiated some debt forgiveness. So a couple of $100 million was wiped off the transaction. In the end, I think it was actually $1.6 billion of bonds that was restructured, and about an $850 million blue bond was issued. Now, the blue bond holders were government organizations, development finance institutions, big social and sovereign. I'm just going to stop my video for a sec because I see the internet is a little unstable. But the investors were a combination of institutional investors and government-linked institutions, and they effectively provided the funding to the host country, and the host country issued the new bonds via this issuer entity. And so over time, including all of the interest that was going to be paid on a net basis, the funding that would eventually be channeled to this conservation trust fund would be in excess of $500 million. And that's just the face value based on today's dollars. that excludes any potential return that can be generated. And so what happens is that half the money from the Conservation Trust Fund would go and sit in an endowment. And eventually, by the end of the 20-year period in which the bonds are live, that endowment on its own will be over $500 million. And you can invest that will be invested in probably a combination of US, European equities, potentially some in the host country, to generate a nice stable return. The proceeds of that, of that return, a portion will be reinvested in the fund to mitigate against potential inflation or inflation erosion, and the rest could be invested into projects. About half of the funding that comes via the repayments, outside of the repayments that would have to go to the bondholders, is going to go to existing and soon to be developed programs in the Galapagos Islands. So some of those would be, conservation programs, some would be biodiversity restoration, and others would be related to the policing and implementation of the marine protected area. And so it's just a win-win-win. There was some negative press released because this was a deal that was effectively sponsored by the United States via an entity called the Development Finance Corporation. However, I think that when you see the benefits and the control, that there's an independent body of conservationists, financiers, and members of the Ecuadorian government that monitor this conservation trust fund. And one of the complaints was that the trust fund wasn't at the sole dispersal of the Ecuadorian people. Unfortunately, Ecuador has a very unstable political situation. On average, since democracy was declared in Ecuador, they've changed government every 2 years since 1830. So it wasn't a risk that the financiers that were investing in the structure were willing to take. So it had to be structured outside of Ecuadorian government control. So it couldn't be nationalized. But it is benefiting the Ecuadorian people. I think some of the first programs that are being implemented are both social impact, but also they are investing in a small fleet of boats that will be deployed by the Ecuadorian Navy to police the Galapagos Islands. And that policing is extremely important to protect the reef against fishing within the marine protected area. One other interesting stat that came out of that from a commercial perspective that I think helps to just highlight how important projects like this are, not only from an environmental perspective, but also from a commercial perspective, is that when the initial marine protected area was implemented, the fish stocks, the tuna stocks in the region quadrupled within 5 years, something like that. I'll get that stat wrong. Maybe it was doubled in 4 years or quadrupled in 5 years. I forget now. But through this conservation effort and other conservation efforts that are being implemented around the Cocos Islands, which is further sort of northeast of the Galapagos, will help to protect the pelagic fish in that region and will actually benefit the tuna industry. And as part of the trust funds programs, they're looking at ways to refit the tuna fleet in the region with equipment that will be less prone to producing a lot of bycatch, and will also allow the fleet to be tracked and prove where they caught their fish, which is a requirement if you want to sell your catch into the EU and various other jurisdictions. You have to be able to prove where the catch is from. They're, of course, under a lot of pressure from fishing fleets from Asia, from the Chinese, from Indonesia, from Taiwan. And so there are also going to be some AI tools that are implemented to help to prevent illegal or overfishing from other nations' fishing fleets. Okay, so sorry for that very confusing slide. I hope it made sense in the end. But I think, Tamsin, perhaps I'll leave it there. That gives you an idea of what we're working towards. But effectively, what we're trying to do is we're trying to develop an equation that starts to make ESG and sustainability pay for itself. And that is the true essence of sustainable finance. And that is the type of capital that can be deployed for climate change adaptation and mitigation. Okay, over to you, Tamsin. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We have gone over time a bit, so if you have to drop off, thanks for joining us. If you are able to stay, Matthias, are you able to stay for a few questions? You're on mute.
Yes. Yeah, not too long though.
Okay. Are there any questions? I've always got questions, but I don't want to hog this time. But maybe while people are thinking, I think what has come through really strongly through both presentations is this idea of innovation and doing things differently and collaboration and really like working together in an integrated way towards different kinds of solutions, which speaks to the future, this unknown future. We have no idea where we're going in a lot of respects, and the need to work together hopefully gets us a little bit closer to where we need to get to. I wanted to ask Matthias, your experience of EI, what has that experience been? I mean, how are they working with your team specifically? Because I mean, I look at Charles and stuff, and I'm like, next time I'm going to understand everything, and then next time, and it's not because the diagrams are confusing, Charles. I promise you. Sorry, Charles has just dropped off. It really is. It's just a different language.
I mean, I know, but it's like, and for me, it's also a very different language, and sometimes I'm just sort of blown away. But like, I mean, we're designers in this room, right? And so we have and one of the things that I am starting to learn is how important it is to, like, there's too little money to do all these projects. And so when you design them, you want to really think like, where could the money come from? Because it will come from a lot of different places. And some of these things can be achieved by giving multiple benefits. Some could be achieved by citing things in a particular way. Some financial sources could be achieved by phasing things in a different way. And what I really appreciate, and I want to do much more work on, is to really intensively collaborate with financial consultants and figure out, like, how can we design the project so that it has the highest chance of getting funded. And in that way, I think that financial consultants are also designers. They just design something differently. And all too often they don't know it yet. And I think once they would start to get a little bit of that attitude, they might actually be even better. But in the context of New York, it is really in like for instance, in federal funding, there is climate-related funding, there is equity-related funding, there's transportation-related funding, right? How can you design a project such that these different funding sources are all accessible, and EY is helping us with that. And then in addition to that, it protects a lot of private properties, like what are the different ways that those could be assessed and paid into the project, as through taxes or fees or through other ways. And then you can start to think, okay, what are economic benefits? Like in like this specifically on the financial district, there's like, it's basically a two layered system with potential for some functions in that? Can we start to think about programming in that? We are now exploring very much how we can do all the package deliveries that have to go into lower Manhattan that are really clogging up the streets. Can we organize those for these type of projects and through these type of projects? And so figuring all those things out and then having a sparring partner like EY is just a lot of fun.
Awesome. Charles, you're back on the call. I'm curious, have you ever worked with landscape architects?
No, I've got to admit I haven't. So I'd
Yet.
love to though. So it's yeah, I've built a few houses, but and I've funded them, but never gone that far. And I'm very interested to hear that you know, Matthijs is dealing with EY and
Oh no.
oh, and it's linked
Charles, we're losing you. I think you need to boot your teenagers off the
to
internet.
financial solution.
We didn't hear you. Oh, this is very frustrating. Do you want to try again? Okay, we've lost Charles, which is a real pity. Oh, you're back. Awesome. Sorry, Charles, we lost your last. We got financial institutions, I think, was the last part that came through.
Oh, sorry about that. There's I think everyone in my neighborhood is busy watching Netflix. So it's dinner time. Yeah, but I was just saying it's very interesting to hear that Matthijs is working with EY, and you know, the instruments that he was referring to are the instruments that are part of our you know, sustainable finance quiver, and they're being added to all the time, and trying to find the right solution for clients. And you know, he mentioned, okay, there's potential instruments that you can leverage for climate finance, but you know, and for transportation projects, for you know, when I look at green building sector, you know, so there's all sorts of ways to leverage off. And so what I hope to add as the, you know, as a you know, sustainable finance consultant, is to listen to the funders, and then listen to those that need the funding, and try and find ways to connect the two. And you know, understanding how banks work and how they can help their clients to issue the instruments is also important. And then being able to combine the different equity and debt solutions is also important. And just one thing that I've been toying with lately is trying to figure out how to issue a sustainability linked preference share for a corporation, you know. And in big you know, in big corporations around the world, you could list preference shares, but you can also issue them to you know, on they can be unlisted as well, so direct placement. So, and because I'm trying to find a way to put the equity back into it. So yeah,
Love that Charles thinks we understand what he's talking about. It's marvelous. I think our job as landscape architects and as dreamers and designers is to come up with the projects and then give them to you to fund. And how you do that, I think, is where some of the magic is going to come from. And I mean, Matthijs, as you were saying, you know, you're trying to consolidate a whole lot of different funding streams and setting up new institutions in order to manage these new types of infrastructure that you're building, which is something that I've come across in Cape Town, because it doesn't sit in one. It isn't a roads project. It could be a park. It could be a piece of water infrastructure. So whose asset is it, and who's responsible, and who should be paying for it? It's complicated. All of this resilient infrastructure, it's not standard. And so I think there's going to be a lot more innovation that we're going to need to come up with in order to deliver the kinds of projects that we're wanting to see. And it's just so exciting that you are managing to do that already in your work in Manhattan. And I mean, I think we need to try and learn as much as we can from how you've managed to make that magic happen. So everyone, thank you so much for your time. I don't want to be any more disrespectful of everyone's evening. And as Charles pointed out, it is supper time and Netflix time. The recording, I will be making it available. I'll email it out to everybody who registered for the webinar, and it will be on the IFLA website as well as the IFLA Africa YouTube channel. I don't know if I'll take my cue from Charles and Matthias. If you're comfortable with people emailing you if they've got some questions, or if they'd like to get the book, and we haven't. I was hoping you put the link in the chat so that people can look you up and order your books as well. If you are comfortable with people contacting you, you're welcome to put your contact details in the chat. But thank you so much, and I think we all probably feel we have an excuse to go and visit New York again and see some of the projects in the flesh, which, yeah, we shouldn't have to have an excuse. Anyway, thank you, everybody. Hopefully see you all soon. Cheers, guys.